Can you guys wave to the camera, please? In today's world, you don't often have a free time. So when you have an event that requires you to bring a baked good, you get stressed out because you don't have the knowledge or time to bake. Well, peanut butter blossoms may be the answer to your problem. Today, I'm going to teach you how to make peanut butter blossoms in 3 easy steps. I have made these cookies countless times with both successes and failures, and I've used a multitude of recipes that have helped me to create my own secret recipe that I will share with you guys today. These are the perfect cookies to bring to a party or just to snack on at home because they are delicious. And you guys can move to the next slide. The process that we're going to go over today includes preparing the dough, baking the cookies, and plating and serving the cookies. And you guys can move to the next slide. First, we're going to talk about preparing the dough. When preparing the dough, you want to make sure that you put the ingredients in the correct order so your cookies have the correct texture. First, you're going to cream a stick of butter, half a cup of peanut butter, half a cup of sugar, and half a cup of brown sugar together. To do this, I like to use the back of a spoon to kind of mash the ingredients together until they're light and fluffy, and it's going to look something like this. In the Serious Eats article, Cookie Science, Why Cream Butter and Sugar Together, from October 29th of 2019, Stella Parks emphasizes that this helps give your cookies a light and fluffy texture. She also adds that it's different than just combining your ingredients together because you're trying to aerate the dough. Next, you're going to beat in an egg, 1 tablespoon of milk, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. After that, all of your wet ingredients will be added, so you can move on to adding your dry ingredients, which will be 1 3/4 cup of flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and half a teaspoon of salt. Leslie Kiska from Stress Baking, in her May 28th of 2020 article, Why You Mix Wet and Dry Ingredients Separately, explains that it's important to add the dry ingredients in last because it helps them to spread evenly throughout the dough. This is important for ingredients like baking soda that cause the cookies to rise. If they go in unevenly, then the cookies will rise unevenly. Next, you're going to want to roll your cookies into 1-inch balls that are going to look something like this. And you're going to roll these balls into granulated sugar and then place them on a baking sheet. And you guys can go to the next slide. Now that our dough is all prepared, we're going to bake our cookies. This is one of the hardest steps because you want to make sure that they're not underdone, but they're also not burnt. You're going to start by preheating your oven to 375 degrees. And if you have a convection setting on your oven, you're not going to want to use it. In the article, your convection setting may not be the best for baking from Lifehacker on June 13th of 2018 by Claire Lauer. She explains that using the convection setting may cause your cookies to spread too much or a crust to form on the outside of them. Without using your convection setting, it should take your cookies about 8 minutes to cook. However, they may not look done when you go to take them out of the oven. But that's okay because when they're on the baking sheet, they're going to cook a little bit more, and you want them to not be completely set when you take them out of the oven because you're going to put a Hershey Kiss on them. Once, I left them in the oven for too long because I was convinced that they weren't done, and by the time I took them out, they were hard, dense, and honestly gross. So don't make the same mistakes that I did, and make sure you take them out at around 8 minutes. And you guys can now move to the next slide. Now that our cookies are all baked, we're ready to plate and serve them. Your first step is going to be taking a Hershey Kiss and putting one on each cookie immediately after they come out of the oven. And they're going to look something like this. Now that our cookies are all prepared, we're going to want to leave them to cool. If you start plating them before they're completely cooled, you run the risk of them breaking and the chocolate won't be completely cooled, so it'll get all over the other cookies. For plating, you're also going to want to make sure that you have a plate that's big enough to fit all of your cookies on it, and a plate that has a cover if you're going to be storing cookies overnight or bringing them to another location. Amelia Lonzi from Leaf TV recommends plating cookies in a concentric pattern or in a spiral pattern in her article, How to Arrange a Cookie Platter for a Party. She also stresses the importance of simplicity but warns against placing your cookies in a pile because it'll look messy. And especially with these cookies, the chocolate will get all over them. And you guys can move to the next slide. Now that our cookies are all ready, let's look back at the steps that we took to get here. First, we prepared our dough and we made sure that we put our ingredients in the right order to give our dough the correct texture. Then we baked our cookies, making sure that we had them baking at the correct time. And lastly, we plated and served our cookies. As Johnny Zini said, baking is about multitasking. If you're prepared and organized, that's half the battle. Hopefully now you feel prepared and organized to make your own peanut butter blossoms. Now all that's left is to enjoy. And does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. How long can you store the cookies for?
If you have them in a sealed container, you can store them for 2 to 3 days. And if you put them in the fridge, they can last a little bit longer. It kind of depends on how airtight the container is and how many times you open it, but you're gonna know once you go to your cookies, if they're really hard, that's not the texture they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be light and fluffy.
I have a question. What would happen if you waited to put the Hershey Kiss on a cookie until they were cooled?
If you wait, the cookies will set, so when you go to put the Hershey Kiss on, it won't combine into the cookie, right? So the cookie will either just crack or the Hershey Kiss will kind of be sitting on top awkwardly and won't mesh into the cookie, so it won't be a part of it.
How could you make these nut-free?
You could use a nut-free butter, so something like the Biscoff butter, which I think is made with graham crackers instead of nuts. That could be substituted equally for peanut butter, and it would give the cookies a little bit of a different taste, but they should be just as sweet and delicious without nuts in them.
How could you make these more decorative?
For Christmas one year, instead of rolling them in white granulated sugar, I bought different colored sugars. So I bought a red and a green sugar. So when you go to roll the dough in the granulated sugar, you can roll it in different colors, or you can roll them in sprinkles, and that gives it just a little more of a fun look.
How can you make these nut-free? What should you do if you want to prepare the dough in advance?
If you want to prepare your dough in advance, you can freeze it. So just make a dough completely, and you can roll the cookies into balls and then freeze that on the baking sheet. Or if you're trying to save space, you can just freeze the dough all by itself. And then when you take it out, you're just going to need to give it some time to thaw. Don't microwave it because that'll start to cook the outside. So if you're going to leave it to thaw, just give it an hour or two to thaw on the counter. And once it gets to a little bit colder than room temperature, then you can start to roll your balls and then roll in granulated sugar. And then you can just bake them as normal. And the cookies dough should last you in the freezer for about a month.
Do you need a stand mixer for this recipe?
You don't need to use a stand mixer. It could definitely be helpful, but I made these cookies last night and I don't have a stand mixer. So you can just do it by hand. It just requires a little bit more elbow grease than it would if you had a mixer. Does anybody else have any other questions? Thank you guys so much for listening.